Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Glendale Christian Church for night 2 of Invincible Church. We are talking about 6 superpowers of mature disciples. We want to grow mature in our discipleship. We don't want to have immaturity run the day. And so, as we seek to grow more and more like Christ and grow more and more complete, grow more and more mature, one of the things that we must adopt as a power of ours is the power of truth. I'm a big fan of truth, not just because Jesus says he is the truth, not just because Superman says he fights for truth, justice, and the American way, but because truth is one of my very favorite things to teach. When I'm not teaching God stuff, in my former years teaching at the University of Arkansas and at John Brown University and at Ozark Christian College, I used to get to teach intro to philosophy, an intro to logic, an intro to ethics. And truth is one of the big topics that comes up in the area of philosophy. Of course, Pilate asks Jesus, what is truth? Truth is a very, very important power for us to possess. But when we are not dealing in truth, sometimes another nefarious attribute creeps in, that of gossiping. Gossip is a big problem. Gossip is a big problem because everybody pretty much says, oh, I don't want to be a gossip. But everybody pretty much loves to be a gossip. It's tough. It's tough because we know we ought not to be, but we also know how fun it is to be. And that's one of the allures and problems with sin, is that sin sometimes carries with it a fascination. Temptation often comes because there's something that we think will feel good. And so it is with gossip. And so what I wanted to do was highlight a few verses, and I'm sure Adam will hit many of the same verses that I talk about, but this just shows the similitude of thought of Christian people about this concept. Gossip. If you want to follow along in the handout, I've got some blanks that show different problems with gossip. Let's start in the book of Proverbs. Chapter 11, verse 13 says, a gossip betrays confidence, but a trustworthy person keeps a secret. One of the bad things about gossip is that it leads to betrayal. Not just betrayal of a person, but betrayal of the confidence that a person has in you. When somebody entrusts you with information, that information oftentimes is expected to be kept tight. Elaine might call it the vault, or other people might have different ideas for how you keep something trustworthy and secretive. But gossip betrays that confidence. Well, Proverbs 16:28 says that a perverse person stirs up conflict, and a gossip separates close friends. So gossip has a problem. It serves as a separator. We don't always intend for gossip to separate things, and yet the result of gossip often is separation. And you can separate close friends by gossiping. And so it is that when you want to stir up conflict, there's a perversion to that. That's perverse. That should never be the goal of a Christian man or woman. But when we gossip, we often have the result of separating close friends. So these are certainly problems. And yet, Proverbs 18:8 indicates the nature of gossip and how we're fascinated with it. The words of a gossip are like tasty or choice morsels. They go down to the inmost parts. You know what it is to have a choice or tasty morsel. Imagine having your very favorite small piece of steak and you just know how tender and juicy it is. Or maybe, as it is fall festival season, there's your favorite piece of candy. And oh, it's a choice and tasty piece. And you love it. This little morsel of chocolate or morsel of your favorite thing, it goes down to the inmost part. We go after that which is tasty. We go after that which is choice because we want it. We think it will satisfy, but actually it has negative results. Proverbs 26:20 says, without wood, a fire goes out. Without gossip, strife or quarrels die down. Strife dies down without gossip, because gossip oftentimes serves as the fuel for strife. In the same way that if you are out at the bonfire and there must be fuel to keep the blaze going, sometimes that fuel is in form of something that's combustible. We might throw a little bit of something that's flammable on the bonfire and see it go up. Or sometimes we might just drop another piece of wood or put a pallet on it and it will go up. Other times, all you need for the flame to continue is enough oxygen. And if that is starved, then the fire goes out. And in the same way, a quarrel that you have with someone else will oftentimes die down if gossip is gone. So gossip sounds good, tastes good, feels good at times, and yet has very negative results. It leads to conflict, some of the things that we talked about last week. But if you try to define exactly what gossip is, you won't find an explicitly biblical passage. There's not one verse that I can discern that will say, this is what gossip is. This describes the nature of gossip. We can get the results of gossip, and we can get some aspects of gossip. And it's by piecing these things together that we can come up with something of a working definition. Here's one that I've heard floated around for a lot of years that I thought was pretty good. Gossip is bearing bad news behind someone's back out of a bad heart. Think about those three aspects. Bearing bad news. In this way, gossip is the opposite of the gospel. The gospel is good news. The gospel is joyous and powerful. Gossip is bad news. Gossip can be bad news in a couple of different ways. Gossip can be bad news if it is false news. If it's fake news, that can be gossip. But it can also be gossip if it's not just fake, but if it's bad news in terms of it might be true, and yet it might serve no edifying purpose to share. That can also be bad news. And when you share bad news with someone, especially behind someone's back, now you're in the territory of gossip. The way to defeat gossip is to talk to a person face to face. But gossips go behind people's backs. And gossip comes out of a bad heart. This drives at the motivation. The motivation might not be entirely nefarious, whereby I seek on purpose to damage or injure someone. I might have no malicious intent at all. I might be whispering behind someone's back because I don't want to hurt that person. I certainly don't want to slug him in the face with my news. And so if I just go behind his back, see, I'm not trying to be horrible, and yet the result can still be bad. And so the bad heart, it's more just an indication of your motivation is off. So I believe that before you share news with someone or about someone, you should ask yourself a series of questions. First, questions concerning the nature of good or bad news. You should ask yourself a question like this: is this story true? How do I know it's true? If we're dealing with the nature of bad news, you first have to ask yourself, is this story true? Another thing you can do is ask yourself, is this story mine to tell, or is it someone else's to tell? You don't need to tell other people's news for them. They can share their news with people. And so you can ask yourself, is this true? How do I know? Is this even mine to tell? And then you can just ask yourself, is this story bad news? Is this something that is uplifting and edifying, that will produce hope and love and peace? Or is this story something that will produce conflict and strife? Do I want to be the straw that stirs the drink? Or do I want things not to get stirred up? Well, there are also questions you can ask about whether or not this is behind someone's back. You could ask yourself a question like this: would I share this story if the person I'm sharing about was right here? If the answer to that is no, then you're sharing behind a person's back. Would I share this tale if the person about whom I'm sharing was sitting right in front of me? If the answer is no, then it's behind their back. Why wouldn't you want to share it if they were right here? Because it's not true? Because it's mean? Because it's mean-spirited? Why wouldn't you be comfortable sharing it right in front of them? Another question that you might ask is, am I hiding this conversation from someone? Am I talking to somebody, but am I hiding this conversation from someone else? Am I only willing to talk about it in a way that hides it from others? Or how about this one? Am I ashamed of it? Am I ashamed to share this news? If I'm ashamed to share it, why am I ashamed to share it? Is it because I know it's slanderous? Is it because I know that it's no good? Or how about this one? Would I be okay if someone shared a story exactly like this about me? If I would not be okay with somebody sharing the exact same kind of story about me with someone else, then that should give me pause before I go on and share this story about someone else with someone else. But there are also a series of questions that can get at your motivation, at your heart. You can ask yourself the very open-ended question, why am I sharing this? Why am I doing this? Sometimes we want to hurt someone. Oh, we shouldn't, but sometimes we do. Sometimes we want just to be in on the tea with everyone else. I know. Why are we sharing this, though? Are the words I'm about to say loving towards someone else? There's an old song that kids used to learn growing up in church. I didn't learn it till I was an adult since I didn't go to church when I was a kid, but I've heard my wife say it, and it goes something like this. If you don't have something nice, say nothing. Take a piece of good advice, say nothing. And then there's some other part to it, but it goes on and on and on. And the whole point is, just be quiet. Is the thing you're saying going to be nice to someone or not? Okay, is this loving? Okay, how about this one? Are the words that I'm sharing going to be not just loving in general, but will they cast my character in a good light? Will sharing this show that I'm a person who just wants to stir up trouble? Or is this the action of a peacemaker? Now look, sometimes things need to be said, but most of the time, if it needs to be said, you can probably say it to the person. But sometimes you have to protect others, and you may have to say something. I understand that. But is this being said as a peacemaker or not? Well, what's the antidote to gossip? Well, the antidote is sharing good news with someone directly out of a good heart. If gossip is bad news shared behind someone's back out of a bad heart, then the opposite is overcoming this by sharing good news directly to a person from a good heart. Think about how the Bible describes truth and the good heart. Proverbs 3:3 says, "Do not let loving kindness and truth forsake you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart." Truth and loving kindness go hand in hand, and you should write them on your heart. Proverbs 12:17 says, "He who breathes out truth declares what is right, but a false witness, deceit." We want to declare what is right. We're told to think about what is right, what is noble, what is admirable, what is good. Therefore, we should also declare such things. Proverbs 14:25 tells us that a truthful witness delivers souls, but he who breathes out lies is deceitful. We are in the soul-winning business. As Jesus expands his kingdom and draws more disciples unto himself, they are the souls who get transferred from the authority of darkness to the kingdom of the Son. The stakes are very, very high. And so a truthful witness delivers souls. Well, we certainly want to be truthful. John 4:24 tells us that God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. If we are worshiping in spirit, and if we are pursuing truth, then gossip doesn't have much of a foot to stand on. John 8:31 and 32 was a series of verses that I used this morning. Jesus was saying, if you abide in my word, then you are truly my disciples. Jesus is big on abiding. You must abide in him. You must abide in his word. If you abide in my word, then you are truly my disciples. And you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. In a world where so many people are captured and held as slaves, we have the opportunity to show people how they can be free, and we must exercise that freedom ourselves. Abide in his word, study it, meditate upon it, memorize it, camp out in his word, grow in your knowledge and love of it. This shows that you're really his disciple. And the truth of it and the truth of him will make us free. Of course, John 14:6, Jesus said, I'm the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. And John 15:26 and 27, when the advocate comes, whom I will send to you from the Father, the Spirit of truth, who proceeds from the Father, he will bear witness about me, and you will bear witness also. If part of our job is to join Jesus in his divine mission, if we are committed to the mission of Jesus, which is to make disciples who make disciples, to bear witness to the truth, to expand his kingdom, then we get to take on the honored role of bearing witness. Jesus bears witness. His words, his deeds, his very life. The Spirit bears witness. And what's so incredible is that we too get to bear witness. We get to collaborate with God in this marvelous task. He is the Spirit of truth. He is the truth. We get to stand on the word of truth. Therefore, we must be people of truth. We should pursue truth above almost anything else, because truth serves as the foundation of the kingdom of God. Those who call out on Yahweh, who call out to him in truth, are the ones he draws near. So, if this is the advantage of truth-telling, and if this is the advantage of loving kindness and abiding in him and abiding in his word, which means we will produce fruit like love and joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, well, then we're not going to be sharing things out of a nefarious or bad heart. We won't have the negative motivation purposefully to hurt people. We won't have the heart or the fruit which is rotten, which wants just to stir up a strife or a quarrel, but instead, we will want to be dealers of directness. And that can change everything. Because sometimes you find yourself in a spot where people might not even have bad motivation. They might not even have behind the back talking. They might just not disagree on what is true. Now, this actually happened this evening, just a moment ago. I was talking with one of our dear sisters, and she was filling me in about one of her friends who was watching the online live stream of our Sunday morning service a few weeks ago during Missions Weekend. And this friend said, "Oh, I saw Andrew preaching." Well, no, he didn't preach that Sunday. And it's true, I didn't preach live that Sunday, but I did preach earlier in the week. I preached on Thursday. Mike recorded it, and then when it came time for the sermon, rather than airing the information about one of our beloved missionaries online, we shifted over so that everybody saw communion, and everybody saw the worship, and everybody saw the whole service. But when it was service time, we didn't see our missionary preach. Those online saw me preach. And so, both were convinced of the truthfulness of their position. And sure enough, both had truthful positions. Now, there was no malicious intent. There was no problem. There was no conflict. There was no quarrel because they were talking directly to one another and they had a good heart, but yet they both had reason to believe that their statement was true. Andrew was preaching on Sunday. Andrew was not preaching on Sunday. Now, we know, if we are dealers of truth, that there are fundamental, immutable laws of logic. And one of the laws of logic is the law of non-contradiction. The law of non-contradiction tells us that something cannot be both true and false at the same time, in the same sense, in the same place. Something may be true and false at different times. It's dark outside. That is true now, but not in 12 or 13 hours. It is illegal to drive on the left side of the road. That is true here, but not there. Andrew is fantastic. That is true generally, but that is not true when it comes to cooking or playing basketball or a great number of other things. Something can't be both true and false. There's an excluded middle. There's a non-contradiction aspect here. You can't be true and false at the same time, same place, same sense. And yet, it was true that I was preaching on Sunday to the person watching online, and it was true that I was not preaching on Sunday a few weeks ago to the people in the auditorium. It was a different place, a different sense, and yet both things were true. So often, quarrels and strife get ginned up in an extra way by gossip. Now, it may be the case that somebody has a genuine conflict, and sometimes conflict is required. But when conflict is required, you can either be aggressive about it, or you can be avoidant about it, or you can be the peacemaker about it. This is what we learned last week. But when conflict emerges, conflict oftentimes is deepened by gossip. Rather than finding out how it is that two people both might be in the right, sometimes we are so convinced of the righteousness of our position that we might speak ill of someone else's position. Now, there are certain cases where there is no gray area at all. There are. And I believe that we can overcome those cases. I believe that we can. I believe that information can solve a lot of things. When people ask me, and they do all the time, oh, well, what about all these voting ballot initiatives? I say, well, I've printed off, I've read it, and this is what I think, and here it is. And they say, but what about this? And I say, oh, I see where you thought that, because there is some confusing language here. One of the best things you can do, and this is another question that you can ask, and this is not a question that you just have to ask before sharing. Foresharing is what I like to call it, according to your sheet. But one of the best questions you can ask is, hey, what do you mean by that? Somebody says something to you. You don't agree. You don't like it. Instead of cocking and loading your fist and getting ready to launch your, hopefully not actual fisticuffs, but verbal assault at somebody, no, hey, what do you mean by that? Because what if what they mean by that is not at all what it sounded like they meant by it when they said it to you? What do you mean by that is a great question because it serves 2 points. The first is that it gives you more time. It throws the conversational ball back in their court. Hey, what do you mean by that? And it makes them talk and re-explain so that you have mental time to formulate. But the second and far more important thing is that it gives them an opportunity better to explain. Oh, I've needed this one a lot of times. When people have asked, what do you mean by that? I automatically think, I don't think they heard it the way I intended it to be heard, so I must now quickly think on the fly of a way to explain it better. That's great when you have another opportunity, because what if the thing you said was just misspoken? Or what if the thing you said involved a word or a term that the one person always had a negative connotation to, and you are now employing it, but not in a negative way? If you seek to find understanding, just as we learned last night, if you seek first to understood and to be seek first to understand and to be understood, you can avoid a lot of problems. But sometimes, if you don't understand or you don't feel that you are understood, one of our quick moves is to go to gossip. And my advice is rather than make the quick shift to gossip, instead, take the deliberate approach to find more truth. Hey, what do you mean by that? And then, if they explain it to you and it's just as horrible, it's just as inflammatory, you want to say, well, why'd you come up with that? Well, how'd you figure that one out? How'd you come to that conclusion? And then they can tell you why they think the dumb thing that they think. And at least now you start to understand, and now you have a way, because oftentimes you don't want to fight about the actual issue. Oftentimes the only way to change a man's heart is not just to beat them on the issue, but to get to the root of the issue. Because oftentimes the thing about which we disagree is fruit. And so if you can get to the root, now you can say, oh, I see that there's actually a great amount of trauma and difficulty emotionally that has come to you because of church stuff. And since I'm talking about God stuff, you don't like the things I'm saying. It's not as much the things I'm saying, it's the fact I'm saying things about God stuff. Your problem is further upstream. Now, you also have this problem, but if I just fix this, I haven't fixed the actual root of the problem. And now I just have to have the same fight about a different topic tomorrow. And so, first you ask, well, hey, what do you mean by that? And second, you might ask, well, how'd you come to that conclusion? And then third, you might ask, well, have you ever considered this alternative? Now, Greg Koukl is great at asking these questions. He's got a fantastic little book called Tactics. It's been out for a long time. It's really great. When I was going through a master's degree program in Christian apologetics with Greg, it was so cool because he was already on the radio as a well-known apologist, Christian apologist. And he just happened to be sitting next to me in class one day. I didn't know who he was because he was on the radio. This was back before Facebook, before Google. This was like 20 years ago. Imagine 2004. I'm in California hanging out with Greg Koukl, and I don't even know it. And so we get to know each other in one of our programs, and he's like, hey, I'm Greg. And I'm like, oh, hey, Greg, I'm Andrew. And then it came out that he was Greg Koukl, and I was like, radio Greg Koukl? He's like, yeah. It's like, why are you here? You could be teaching these classes. He's like, yeah, I know. These are actually all my friends. And it's like, yeah, I go to lunch with J.P. Moreland every Tuesday. And I'm like, what? Like the guys that I look up to, he's personal friends with them. I was like, why are you doing this? And he said, well, sometimes you just need letters after your name so snooty people will take you seriously. I was like, I already do the job, but now I get letters behind my name, and now people will take me more seriously. I was like, wow, this guy's going to get a whole degree just so that he can do what he's doing to a better degree. Smart guy, Greg Koukl, Stand to Reason, and his book Tactics. Those last three questions, what do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion? And have you ever considered this alternative? Are lifted just directly from his stuff. My definition of gossip, lifted just directly from smart other people. Most of what we do is not invented by us. We just hear the best stuff that is shared, and then we go share it with others. So, if we lay this bad gossip, good truth, on top of how to have conflict effectively, I think we might be a lot better off. Well, let me get out of the way, and let me now turn it over to Adam Harshman, because he has got all kinds of great information for you. So turn your page over and get ready to take some excellent notes.
So the concepts that Andrew's referring to where you're seeking to clarify things and so on, I typically refer to this as the verbal mulligan. So if you're not familiar with golf, a mulligan is when you redo a shot because you shanked one off into the woods somewhere, and you're never going to find that $4 ball ever again. And so a verbal mulligan is the combatant against one of my pet peeves, which is this idea that when people are in an argument and somebody says something and then they try to take it back and rephrase it. They're like, no, you already said the one thing, so you can't possibly have meant another thing, so I'm just going to keep assuming that the thing you said the first time is the thing you really meant, instead of allowing you an opportunity to actually clarify what you're doing or what you're saying. And so being able to stop for a moment and actually ask for that clarification, like, hey, help me understand where you're coming from, is giving them that opportunity rather than only stirring up more strife by disallowing any additional comment that they might make about the thing that you may be in conflict about. One of the concepts that will probably be mentioned again, I think I briefly mentioned it last time, was this idea that we all have our own lens through which we see the world. And this may be news to you, but yours isn't perfect. The way that you see the world isn't correct 100% of the time. Probably way less than 100% of the time. But when we're in conflict with people, when we're dealing with mistruths and things like that, our brain defaults to believing ourselves. Because if our brain didn't believe itself, it would be in conflict with itself, and it's too lazy to deal with that. It doesn't like dealing with internal conflict. So it just assumes that any conflict that might be happening is out here. It must be with these people, right? And so when we can stop and start from the position that there's a pretty good chance I'm wrong, and then go from there, then you're going to be in a much better position to be able to ascertain what real truth is. It opens us up not only to being educated by the people around us, but through Scripture. I mean, how often do we read Scripture and then interpret it in a particular way that suits us better than it suits God? And as we go through these verses tonight, some of them are going to be kind of toe-steppy, right? They could be things that, if you really take them seriously, can penetrate to your heart and convict you of something that you may have been doing for decades and not really realizing what you've been doing. And that's great. That's the purpose of nights like tonight, is to be able to see inside ourselves and look for those things that will help us to draw closer to God. For those of you who were here last week with the tissue paper example, right? This idea that the closer that I can get to God, the more invincible I become. Not because I become stronger, but because the person who I'm grafted into, the Holy Spirit, is stronger, and I'm closer to Him. So I'm going to go through a few of the thoughts that I have on this topic, and hopefully, again, dive a little bit deeper, and then also come do some practical kind of application pieces to add on to what Andrew had to say. The first couple of scriptures that I'd like to read, the first one is also from Proverbs, and it's 21:23. It says, "The one who guards his mouth and tongue keeps himself out of trouble." Right? We should be trying to keep ourselves out of trouble, particularly the kind of trouble this references, which is sin trouble. Right? We should be all about staying out of that kind of trouble. So guarding our mouth and tongue is what helps us to do that. The second, from Matthew 12:36 and 37, "I tell you that on the day of judgment," by the way, these are the words of Jesus, who will be there. "I tell you on the day of judgment, people will have to account for every careless word they speak. For by your words you will be acquitted, and by your words you will be condemned." Every careless word that we speak, we will be held accountable for in the time of judgment. Think about how many words you speak in a day, right? For women, it's like 2 million. I don't know, something, that's a lot. For men, it's like at least 50. But every single one of those words we're going to be held accountable for at the time of judgment. And so this is an incredibly important topic, because I don't think there's anything that we choose more in life than the words that come out of our mouths. I don't do anything more than talk, right? And so we need to be on top of our tongue. So Andrew gave his definition of gossip, bearing bad news behind someone's back out of a bad heart. I like to think about this as also being like 3 different criteria that align with those pretty well. First of all, gossip occurs when the other person is not present. If you're saying it to their face, it's something else. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, particularly if it's still mean, right? But that's one way you can know whether or not the thing that you're doing is gossiping or if it's something else. Is the person you're talking about there? If not, you've already got one check mark. The problem that this presents is that there's no opportunity for that person to offer clarification or defend themselves, and it represents an avoidance of the truth when you're engaging in gossip. You're avoiding getting the actual information from the actual person that it actually involves when you're going to someone else and talking about it. So not only is it, often not true, it is anti-truth. It is the opposite of seeking truth. Second, gossip is negative. You can talk good about people all you want behind their back. Behind their back, in front of their face, whatever you like to do. If you want to say nice things to people, go for it. All right? Kill each other with kindness, so to speak, right? I don't think that we would have a special series on you guys are being too nice to each other. Right? I know. Well, I suppose if we got into the idea of like flattery, right, where it's actually false truths that we're saying about people to their face or behind their backs just to gain some other advantage. But just the genuine niceness that we can display to one another, there is no law against this. And the third one, which I think surprises some people, is that gossip is not intentionally false. The person who is speaking it believes it to be true. That doesn't mean that it is true. It just means that they believe it's true, right? Now, and that could be a bad thing. They can know that it's negative, right? Heard so-and-so did such and such a thing, and that wasn't really good. It would be gossipy. But they think that the thing is true. And a lot of times I'll hear that from people. It's like, well, it's not gossip if it's true. Yes, it is. It is the definition of gossip. It's what you believe to be true, but that is bad about somebody you're not talking to right now. And so we get that through assumptions, lack of information. We could do the telephone game example if we wanted to. We could start a little message and let it travel around the room and see what kind of hilariousness the children come up with over here. But we don't need to do that because everybody knows what I'm talking about. Like, we come to different conclusions that are not true, that we think are true, because somebody might have told us that it was true, and whether we heard it correctly or incorrectly is irrelevant, because now we believe it's true, and we can pass it on to other people. This is still gossip. Now, there are also times when people are just deliberately mean, right? They're deliberately defaming somebody else. That's actually a different word. That's slander. Slander is when you know the thing is true or not true. You're saying the thing that is definitely not true to hurt somebody. All right? This is also not good. There's scripture about this as well in Proverbs 19:5. It says, "A false witness will not go unpunished, and one who utters lies will not escape." It's literally one of the 10 Commandments not to bear false witness against your neighbor. And that idea of slander is exactly in line with this idea of bearing false witness. It's knowingly saying something bad about somebody else. And so, as we're talking and mostly referencing to gossip, you can throw that in there too if that's something that you struggle with. But I think the thing that we tend to see more in a church setting is gossip. I don't think very many people wake up in the morning and as their feet hit the floor, they're thinking, how can I ruin somebody's life today? Especially at church, right? Like, I can really get under somebody's skin if I just say this thing about them, right? I believe better about all of you than that. So I don't think that's typically the problem that we're dealing with. But gossip weasels its way into our conversations in church all the time. Every day. Probably today. in Colossians 3, 8 through 10. But now you must also put away all of the following: anger, wrath, malice, slander, and filthy language from your mouth. Do not lie to one another, since you have put off the old self with its practices, and have put on the new self. You are being renewed in knowledge according to the image of your Creator. So that's Paul talking to the church in Colossae. So it's not like it was assumed that, once these people became Christians, well, you're just not going to have these problems anymore. That's most of the letters that he's writing is about, you guys are still having a bunch of problems, I see. Stop it, right? And this is our version of doing that here. So let's talk about different kinds of gossip. Now, I can't begin to come up with an exhaustive list of all the different ways that people can gossip, but I came up with a few that I think are relatively common. The first one I call the loose lips gossip. Back in World War II times, there was posters that they would put out, loose lips sink ships. This idea that, like, if you don't keep your mouth shut, then something real bad's going to happen to our, sailors in the seas or our armies in the European theater or whatever. This idea, like, keep your mouth shut, like the song I was not familiar with says, because I grew up Methodist. We have different songs, I think. But the loose lips gossip is probably the most familiar to us, the most common type that we would think about when we are talking about gossiping. A couple of scriptures to that end. Proverbs 20:19, the one who reveals secrets is a constant gossip. Avoid somebody with a big mouth. I like that particular interpretation. Avoid somebody with a big mouth. Proverbs 10:19, where there are many words, sin is unavoidable, but the one who controls his lips is wise. So the key to identifying this kind of gossip is how the conversation is approached and to begin with. So this idea of, like, have you heard da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da? If you start a sentence with have you heard to somebody that is not the subject of the thing you're getting ready to say, there's a really good chance you're getting ready to gossip. It's a really good, mental flag to put up in your mind that, okay, if I ever hear those words exiting my mouth, I need to shut the mouth, think first, figure out if this is really something I ought to be talking about, right? And these are the people who we know they can't be trusted with a secret, whose main topics of conversation are other people's business, getting into the lives of others. But like we referenced with that tasty morsel scripture, these can be very difficult to resist. Even when, as the listener, we identify that that's what's going on, we kind of want to know. We want to know what the story is. What were you getting ready to say? No, go on, please. Right? And that brings me to the second kind of gossip. This is the silent gossip. The silent gossip is the one who's ready to hear. They're ready to take it in. They're an open vessel in which to pour the gossip that others may have to offer. They're collectors of information. They don't even have to speak or participate in the gossip to be a collaborator in that gossip. There's a verse about this in Proverbs 17. Verse 4. A wicked person listens to malicious talk. A liar pays attention to a destructive tongue. I think that's interesting. A liar pays attention to a destructive tongue. You're not even the one speaking, but yet you're still called a liar because you're taking in those malicious words from other people. Right? And sometimes we excuse ourselves from this as a problem. Well, I didn't pass it along. Right? I didn't say anything. But we listened to the story. We didn't do anything about it. We'll get to that in a minute. The third type is what I call the fanning the flames gossip. And this goes back to one of the scriptures that Andrew referenced also, and I'm going to expand on it a little bit. Proverbs 26:17 to 22, which includes the without wood, fire goes out, without a gossip, conflict dies down. If we go a few verses ahead of that, and starting in 17, it says, a person who is passing by and meddles in a quarrel that is not his is like one who grabs a dog by the ears. Like a madman who throws flaming darts and deadly arrows, so is the man who deceives his neighbor and says, I was only joking. Without wood, a fire goes out. Without gossip, conflict dies down. As charcoal for embers and wood for fire, so is a quarrelsome man for kindling strife. The gossip's word are like choice food that goes down to the one's inmost being. And I like that idea of like the person who's passing by and meddles in a quarrel that's not his is like one who grabs a dog by the ears. And we're not talking like, oh, you cute little puppy dog, right? We're talking about, within the context of this culture, these are like rabid dogs that wander the streets they're not people's pets, right? And wandering up to one and just grabbing it by its ears is asking for a fight. It's asking to escalate a quarrel that isn't yours to begin with, right? And when you insert yourself into somebody else's business, into somebody else's conflict, when you become like that triangulation that occurs in so many conflicts, then it's like God grabbing the dog by its ears. It's not going to have a pleasant outcome. This type of gossip often justifies their participation in the gossip because they were just trying to help. They're not the one that started it. They're not even the one that was originally listening to it. But by inserting themselves into the situation, they made it part of their problem. They inserted themselves into a sinful position. They might feel like they were genuinely passing along information rather than engaging in sinful gossip, but this is the type that fuels those conflicts more than any of the other types. With other types where, they may remain isolated to the person that you're talking to, when you start making it a group activity, it's probably going to escalate even more. The fourth kind, which might be the, most inflammatory, is the prayer request gossip. Right? Oh, we need to pray for so-and-so because I heard they're back on the bottle again or whatever. Or so-and-so's kids are doing this or that or the other, and, we really ought to keep them in our prayers. If they didn't tell you to tell other people that, that's gossip. Plain and simple. We might think that we're doing a good thing, right? Aren't we supposed to intercede for other people in our prayers? Yeah, do that in your closet, not in a group setting, right? If those people who you're talking about want you to get prayer for somebody, that's a different matter. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, I observed something and I think I'm going to, just throw it out to a big group of people. They'll keep it quiet. What's said at small group stays at small group, right? No, probably not, right? And then it gets back to that person and they wonder, how did anybody know about this? Why did 40 people call me and say I'm praying for you? Right? It's nice to be prayed for. It's not so nice to be gossiped about at prayer time. Right? So I'll tell a little story that I'm a counselor. I'm a professional counselor. I hear lots of stories. And as I was preparing for this particular story came back to mind because a lot of times when we think about like who is hurt by gossip, right? I think the obvious answer is the person you're gossiping about, right? It hurts their reputation amongst other believers. It can hurt their feelings when they know they're being talked about in a negative way. I think from what we've said so far today, it is obvious, hopefully, that it also hurts the gossiper, It hurts the hearer because it puts us in a position of sinfulness that we could easily avoid by just not talking about it. But the story that I want to tell you is about this lady who came to me for counseling, and she was talking about how depressed she was. I do a lot of depression stuff, anxiety stuff, and we were digging kind of back into like, how long's that been going on for you? And we went back further, and we went back further, and we went back further. She had all this just long list of hurts that she'd encountered in her relationships over long periods of time, and some of those were self-inflicted and some of those were not. But as we got further and further back into her history, we settled on this idea that when she was a little girl, she would hear her parents talking badly about people at church. And the thought came to her 7, 8-year-old mind, if that's how they talk about the other people in our lives that they're supposed to love and care about, what must they think about me? And as a 7, 8-year-old girl, she started developing this concept that I can't trust anybody to tell me how they really feel, especially the people that are supposed to be the ones that really love me, that really care about me, the ones that are raising me up in this house. Because she observed that every day when they came home from church, it was just a big gossip fest, talking badly about the other people that she cared about, and carried that on throughout her entire life, through all of her relationships, caused these trust issues that didn't allow her to seek a depth of relationship anywhere in her life. And I don't think that's something that we think about a lot. Who's listening? Who's hearing what we're telling other people about other people? And how might they interpret that? And it doesn't have to be little kids. It could be a private conversation that you think's private in the lobby area or in your classroom or in a restaurant. Somebody's listening, overhearing. People like gossip, so they're going to be listening into your conversations. What impact does that have on our ability to witness to other people about how loving the Christian community is supposed to be when they constantly hear how we talk about people behind their backs? So not only does this harm the person that you're talking about, not only does this harm the person that's doing the talking, not only does this harm the person that's doing the listening, it harms anybody within earshot. So how do we overcome this? How do we combat gossip in the church, in our family right here? Ephesians 4:29. Do not let unwholesome talk come from your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. That should be the guideline for all the words. All the words. When we're held in judgment for every word that comes out of our mouths, from this moment forward, we want most of them, as many as possible, to fall into this category. This idea that we spoke things that are helpful. We spoke things that are edifying. We spoke things that are building others up rather than tearing them down. There's a concept called unconditional positive regard. Unconditional positive regard is defined, I'll define it backwards. So regard is simply what you think about things, right? If you sign a card, best regards, it's the same as saying best thoughts, right? Positive regard would be good thoughts, right? Pleasant thoughts, positive thoughts. Unconditional positive regard would be having those good thoughts all the time, without condition, or under all conditions. When we have that as a high priority, to think, what is the best I can possibly think about this person in this situation? What is the best that I can do to help this person rather than bring them down in not only the way that I talk, but in the way that I act towards them? When we hear something that doesn't sound quite right, do we give them the benefit of the doubt? Do we stop and attempt to clarify that and allow them the opportunity to share with us their truth, the truth about the situation, rather than hearsay, gossip, assumptions? When we start from a platform of treating everybody as if they're doing the best they can, right? Not everybody's going to be in the same place that you are. They're in the place they are, which goes back to this idea of our lens. They're looking at the world through a different lens than you're looking through the world. And rather than allowing that to cause division and strife within our community, we can stop and we can clarify. We can stop and we can check our own thinking so that we can be sure that what we're thinking about that person is edifying and uplifting and beneficial to them. This is a novel concept. Talk to the person instead of about them. The ultimate anti-gossip, right? When you actually go to the person with your concern rather than to someone else, that is the end of gossip. Assuming you stay with that person, right? If you then go later to someone else, you're still gossiping, right? Like, you got to be able to talk to people. But I think we're so afraid of offending somebody that we won't just have the conversation. This is why we started the series with the conflict stuff. Because if you know how to do that well, within a godly way, then you can do this. You can go to the person and ask them a question about something that you may have a concern about. When doing that, we have to have an ability to be bold with them, right? Many years ago, we had some friends that were from Philadelphia, East Coasters, okay? And they talk different out there. They approach things different on the East Coast than we do in the Midwest. And one of the conversations that I had was that they thought that folks in the Midwest were really rude. And I'm like, that's what we think about you. All right? And I asked them to explain this. What do you mean that Midwesterners are really rude? And they're like, man, you can't get a straight answer out of anybody around here. All they do is beat around the bush and beat around the bush. If they just say what they mean, then I'd know and we can move on. Right? And there's some downsides to their approach, like the lack of tact. But I think we can blend this together. I think that we can have tact, that we can approach conversations in a tactful manner and still have the boldness to actually talk about the thing that's important. And that's what we have to develop. We have to develop the ability to just go talk to the person. Now, as potential persons that one might go talk to, we also need to be able to be receptive to that. If we react poorly anytime somebody comes to us with a concern and we get all offended or defensive or we attack them back or whatever, they're not likely going to do that again. People don't like getting attacked. So we have to be able to develop, as churchgoers, the ability to receive boldness well. When somebody has built up the courage to come actually talk to you about a thing, we need to be able to stop and receive that well. You may not agree with it. If you already agreed with it, you probably wouldn't be doing the thing that they're concerned about. We have to be able to receive that criticism. We're called to hold each other to account. We're supposed to be holding each other accountable for things. And part of the disciple-making mission that we have is to continue to grow and develop as Christians. None of us are there yet. So we all ought to be in a position where we can receive feedback, critical in both ways, as criticism and vital. We have to be able to receive that for this to work, or else it's just going to cause more conflict, right? Which we already taught you how to deal with last week, so you should be great at it by now. Got a week to practice. And so, reiterating those same questions that Andrew was saying earlier, right? Should I be saying this? Or should I be saying this to this person versus the person that it's about? We have to check ourselves before we wreck ourselves. I couldn't not say it. I tried not to say it. I didn't even write it down. I had to say it. We have to check ourselves. We have to be able to monitor our own tongue in order for this to work. We have to be able to get ourselves in the right mindset in order for this to work. We have to have the right motive in order for this to work. And as we get ready to move into table time, I just leave you with two final Proverbs. 29:20 says, "Do you see a man who speaks too soon? There's more hope for a fool than for him." Proverbs 18:21. "Life and death are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit." Switch over.
As table time comes to the fore, I wonder if there's anybody who wants to ask a question to the whole group first, though. If so, come down to the microphone, and Adam will do his best to answer it.
No, it's not a question, but several years ago, there were, 5 or 6 guys when I lived in Illinois, and we came up with the acronym. Now, you've covered everything, but we came up with the acronym of THINK. And so we got to joking around about it, and sometimes you would say something off color, and did you think about it? The T, you mentioned, is it true? H, anybody have an idea for H?
Helpful.
Helpful. I, intelligent, inspirational. N, very important. N, what's N? Boy, oh boy.
That's my daughter.
All the stars there. Necessary. Is it necessary? And the K for? You've raised her well. And so on anything you say, and it's not necessarily just for gossip, but we got to the point where anything that we said to each other, was it true? Was it helpful? Was it inspirational? Very, very important. Was it necessary? Did you have to say that type of thing? And in a way, it's always in the back of my mind. I don't do it all the time, but it's in the back of my mind. But I know when I go to my table, I'm going to use that acronym for, why are women more often than men called gossips? Is that true? Is that
We'll
helpful?
have to figure it out together, Ray.
And I'll go back to my table.
That's just from my observation of sitcoms on television. That's just sometimes the case, but no. I want you guys to get to talk about it. Have we got any other questions or comments
Andrew.
to give?
Andrew.
Yes.
What was K? People online did not hear what K was.
K is kind.
Thank you.
Is it kind?
All right.
No, you did. They just didn't hear it, Ray. No problem. And so Mike's got our back.
I want you to clarify that thing. You hit it pretty hard about the gospel prayer time.
Mhm.
You talked about should we pray about the kids drinking too much and those kind of things. But there are others, you hear things about a sickness in the family. I mean, sometimes we hear things that we want to share. Is there a line to be drawn somewhere that we shouldn't share? We could go ahead and share.
This will surprise you. You should ask the person if they want you to share it. Send them a text. Give them a call. Hey, I heard you weren't doing well. Is that okay is it okay if I share that with my prayer group? Is that okay that I share that with the elders at church so that we can be praying for you? All right? Just because we heard it doesn't mean that they want it talked about. And even if it is illness or something, that might not be some people are very, very private about those kinds of things and don't want a lot of people to know what are going on in their medical lives. And so before you get to Bible study that night, give them a call. Hey, I'm on my way to Bible study. I know this is going on. Is that okay if I share that with the rest of the folks there so we can be praying for you?
I met a man just on Friday, and without even having to ask, he said, I'll take all the prayers I can get. And so that's the green light. That's all right. Share it with the prayer team. Share it with the elders. Share it with everybody you come in contact with. Because sometimes people are very eager for their situation to be prayed about. So yeah, you can check. Also, one of the things you can do is preemptively just ask, is there anything I can be praying for you about? What can I bring to my prayer group about? And then you can get in. We don't have to have a lack of things about which to pray. There are many. Julie?
Stay on my tiptoes. I'll just bring it down here. After last week talking about conflict, how do you navigate the silent gossip with the concept of taking witnesses whenever there is a conflict?
Yeah, so last week I mentioned this idea of when, in Matthew 18, it talks about taking one or two witnesses with you if you're going to confront somebody after doing so individually. And that was kind of what I was referring to, is this idea like a witness is not somebody who just also heard the thing that you heard. A witness is a thing witnessed. They have firsthand information about the thing also, in addition to this person who might have gone to them in, one-on-one in that Matthew 18 kind of way. Other people who have witnessed that same thing for themselves would be witnesses versus just gossip receptacles. How do you know they know? Who knows? There's this question you can ask, which is, how do you know that? Answers in the question. You make it easy on me. Right? Yeah, we can ask. Like, is that something that you've witnessed, or is that something you heard about? Again, that goes back to the boldness of being able to just ask that question. Right? Sometimes we're afraid to, I don't want to sound like I'm questioning them. Yeah, you do.
And we live in a society where we have anonymous sourcing in news a lot, and sometimes we say, news agency says, we're not going to run with this story until we get, a second confirmation. I was like, you can just be making stuff up. You can just be talking with somebody who or one guy tells another guy, and then both of you tell. Always checking into things is pretty important.
By the way, that's exactly what they did to Jesus, right? They're like, we could drum up some witnesses to just say the things that we want them to say so that we can get him crucified, and that would rule. It's not cool.
Josh?
You talked about the listener is just as guilty as the person giving the gossip. Can you give some practical application about how to get yourself out of that conversation tactfully?
Yes. It'll be real awkward, probably. Right? Because if you just are like, hey, this doesn't sound like something we ought to be talking about, right? You can say something like that. I don't think we should be talking about this with so-and-so without so-and-so here. Or maybe we can FaceTime them and see if they can join the conversation. You'll get a response real quick, all right? On whether or not that person thinks you ought to really be talking about it. Like, let's just call them up, right? And, yeah, it's not going to be comfortable, probably. It's going to be awkward, uncomfortable, weird, and that's fine. You're going to have to come up to the mic so that it gets onto the live stream. Sure.
So if you want to extricate yourself from a conversation that feels gossipy, if you, as the receiver of the information, instead of just saying, no, I don't want to talk about this, you just say something kind, nice, inspirational about the person whom the other is speaking, then that can oftentimes derail it. That's what Sven said.
Sometimes that depends on the relationship that you have with that person, right? What we hope develops from all of this is the ability to say that to another person and then be receptive to it, right? That's the ideal that we would have for our community, is if somebody thinks, oh, hey, this may not be okay, that, and so, no, it's fine, it's fine. Instead of getting defensive or upset about it, that we can be like, okay, you may be right. Maybe we shouldn't be talking about it, right? Like being receptive on that end.
So impression without expression might lead to depression. We don't want you to be depressed. Adam combats depression all the time. So we want to give you the chance to express yourselves, and maybe you don't want to the whole group. Let's now take the next 19 minutes, and let's turn inward to our tables. Let's express ourselves. You can answer some of the questions that are provided. You can just share some of the thoughts about the information provided tonight. We'll come around and we'll see if there's anything you want to share with us too. Thank you guys so much. Let me close with a quick prayer. Dear Yahweh, thank you so much for truth. You are the truth. You are the Spirit of truth. You have given us the word of truth. May we be ambassadors of the truth. May we be those who bear witness to the truth. And may we be those who avoid gossip. And may we be those who think carefully about what is said, and those who speak more slowly. Yahweh, we love you, but please don't just take our word for it. See it in our actions. This we pray in your perfect name. Amen. Thank you guys. We really appreciate it.